of the people in the room, but if you don't know me, I work with our one of our development teams working on our dashboard and reporting products and forms. I have many years of experience at PCC as a reporting subject matter expert. So I work with a lot of practices, getting them to understand our reports. And we're going to spend the next couple hours or so, I think we go right till noon, if I'm not mistaken, talking about financial reports. This is meant to be more of a introductory, sort of philosophical in some respects, high-level course, as opposed to tactical. We may have some time at the end for folks to log in, play around with a couple of reports, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and I'm going to introduce you to some reports. I'm going to reference lots of different reports and pages, but it's not meant to be as tactical. We do have 2 sessions that are walk-in sessions where we'll have PCC staff there. This afternoon, there's a reporting walk-in session. I think it's right past the PCC office here. There's another one tomorrow afternoon. That is great time to take some of the stuff you learn, bring it over there. If you have specific reports you want to run or better understand, there'll be PCC folks there to work with you. So the goals of this session, I'm hoping that you'll, again, get an introduction to some operational and strategic financial reports. We're going to focus on the financial side. Tomorrow morning, we have a clinical reports session where we'll focus more on the clinical side. I'm hoping you'll also get a recognition of some areas at your practice that you think may need some oversight. So as I go through many of these reports and show you information, think about your practice. Think about some of the information that you know about your practice, or some of the data that you have a challenge trying to get to or get access to. Make note of that. All right. I want you to think about that, and like I said, you'll have some opportunities later in the conference to work with us to better understand those reports, or maybe even get on your system and run them yourself. Okay, so this is just a summary, really, of all the different reports we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to start with billing oversight reports, and I'm going to talk about reports that you should, on a regular basis, run and be aware of and know how to oversee billing operations at your practice. We'll talk about claim reports and other billing reports. We're also going to spend a good amount of time talking about productivity reports. If anyone was here on Tuesday at the pre-conference, we talked a lot about that. We're going to talk more about productivity reports and how to get visit and charge and payment information broken down by provider, broken down by for your practice, or maybe even by location. RVU reports and E&M coding, active patient counts, new patient counts. So we'll talk a lot about productivity reports. And then finally, we're going to talk about dashboard, strategic financial reporting. And these are various measures that you may be influenced by external mandates. Like if you need to report on information for insurance companies, or getting a better understanding of preparing for insurance negotiations, for example. We're going to talk about some reports that are going to be useful for that. So again, summary of everything I'm going to talk about. I want to start by mentioning we have documentation, and this is fairly new, we just added it a few months back, that will guide you to the reports that we at PCC recommend that you run on a regular basis. We have this documentation broken out into weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually reports that we recommend you run, and where to find them, what the report names are, and so forth. You can scan that QR code to get right to that Learn documentation. But I want to mention this because this is a great resource for you to see. If you're not sure which reports you should even be running in PCC, this can help you get an understanding of that. I'm going to point you to most of these reports. This documentation page has dozens and dozens of different reports. We're not going to hit on all of those today. I want to focus on the key reports that I think are most useful today, but this has a lot more detail. Okay, let's start by talking about some routine billing oversight reports. And the first one is about charge review. Reviewing your charge posting. I was talking to somebody this morning, right here, that noticed that when they ran some reports, they noticed that they found some visits where the clinicians and the billing staff missed some codes. The sick visit code wasn't even billed with the visit. It's important on a regular basis to review your charge posting and your coding. All right, one way you can do this is by just spot checking, right? You don't need to review every single visit, but having somebody that can spot check your visits, your posted visits, and just check the codes. Did you get the modifier on this visit when you needed it? Did you capture all the vaccine admin codes for the well visit and the vaccines that you've done? So really, it's a question of, like, are your providers or your billing staff missing any codes? Okay. I have a screenshot here. You can go right into your visit in the EHR and the visits, and as they are posted, you'll see that little posted mark. You click on that, you're going to see the charges that were posted. So having somebody that is most familiar with coding at your practice review these is a good idea to do. It's recommended to run this at least weekly, and again, it's spot checking, all right? You're just making sure that you're capturing everything. So doing this in the EHR, it just means going one by one through them to check it out. Another way you can do this, and some of you may be familiar with this, but on the practice management side, we have a report called Daily Check, okay? It's in your proving out window in practice management, and it's designed basically to spot check, all right? It's going to give you a long list for a given day of all the charges that have been posted for your practice, okay? It's going to show you what was posted in checkout, and also below that can show you what was charted by the clinician on the electronic encounter form in the EHR. So you can compare the procedures that were charted with what was actually billed. All right, this is just another way to do the same thing, just to review and spot check your charge posting. But I mention it because it's important to be able to catch those mistakes, like were there any visits where you forgot the billing code or forgot a modifier or something like that. Another billing oversight report and this is fairly new in the EHR. All right, when you're sending claims, there's a tab now for needs corrections. All right, this will identify claims that are being held up for whatever reason. And you now have the ability, I believe, to click on those and actually make the change really easily. All right, these are claims in this needs correction tab that haven't been submitted. All right, you've tried sending the batch of claims, but it got held up for whatever reason. If there's and the example I have here is that the policy for a patient, if it wasn't eligible on the date of service, it's going to say, you're billing it to this insurance, but that insurance isn't on the patient. All right, so it gives you the opportunity to fix that, and that needs correction tab will identify those. Reviewing unresolved claim rejections is also important. We don't have this in the EHR yet, but I believe this is coming soon. On the practice management side, in the insurance billing and collections window, there is a billing error report. So what this is showing the claims that got out, they got to insurance, and insurance rejected it for some reason. And you can run this report to identify those claims that have some sort of error or rejected status. Okay. These are claims that they could have been rejected by PCC before you sent them out. Those will be on here, but they're also going to include the rejections that came back from insurance. Okay, run this every few days. Your billing office should be running this on a regular basis and fixing this stuff, all right? I don't have a screenshot of that, but when you run that, you're going to see, I'm trying to think of an example, like insurance rejected a claim because of a code issue, or the patient wasn't covered by that insurance, they'll reject the claim for that reason. It's important to fix that and address those on a regular basis. Encounters by billing status. So in the EHR report library, under the billing reports, there's this report, and it's really used to find visits that you still need to bill, all right? Are there any visits that your clinicians haven't yet finalized? They haven't finished charting and they haven't put their codes in for? Or are there visits that your clinicians finalized, but you haven't actually sent, your billing office hasn't posted the charges and sent the claims? That's what this report is designed for, and I have some screenshots of how to run that. You can run this individually for individual providers. You can run it for every provider. What I've seen offices do is run it individually by provider and actually hand it to them things. Okay, these are the visits that you still need to finish. And you just want to make sure that you don't have visits in the past that are waiting to be submitted and waiting to be finalized. You can run it for any date range. Again, you can restrict by provider or location. And these are examples of statuses. So if you want to find encounters that are ready to post or have new items, so that means the clinician finalized it, they're ready for the billing office to post them, but they haven't actually been posted, you can use those statuses. If they've added new items, like so this is a visit that the clinician made ready, but then they went in and added another charge or something like that, the status changes to new items for that. So good report to run to identify if there's anything that you're still waiting to bill, actually have the charges posted and sent out to insurance. Alternatively, you can find encounters that clinicians forgot to make ready for billing, or just haven't gotten to yet, all right? If you choose the status of not ready, that means the clinician hasn't made that visit ready. They've charted the visit, but they haven't finished putting in the codes. Okay. And by the way, if anyone has questions about this stuff, I'm going to keep us moving along, but you can feel free to ask because I think we'll have some time for questions. We have a microphone up here. I'm going to, rather than walk around the room with a mic, if you have a question, just come up there, raise your hand and come up there. All right, you can print and export these results. Like I mentioned, I've seen some offices that will print this out and put it on the desk of each clinician saying, okay, these are the ones that I'm waiting for you to finish on. When you run this, you can go back in time and go even further back than 30 days. So you just want to make sure you're not leaving any visits out there that are waiting to be sent out. Hospital, I don't know if you have clinicians that are seeing patients in the hospital still. Sometimes those get added a little later on. So it's good to make sure that you're not forgetting about those if the codes are put in there, or if the encounter is charted but not billed out. You want to be able to catch that. All right, payment reconciliation. So hopefully everybody at the front office, I know Lynn talked about this yesterday in her front office best practices class. Payment reconciliation in the EHR, there's a report for that under billing. This is designed for front desk to reconcile their payments. You're going to see a report like this with cash, credit cards, and check payments. You can run it individually for individual users. You're going to see a total and then the details within that. But really what you want is every individual front desk user themselves and just prove out the payments that they're collecting at the time of service. All right. Really, really important regular daily process to have and to do and to make sure you're running this report. Insurance billers can run this as well. Actually, not that report. Insurance billers would run a different report. In practice management, these are two examples of payment totals by check number and payment detail by check number. And these aren't standard stock reports, I don't believe. If you're a new practice, you may have this on your system as a standard report, but the purpose of this is for insurance billers, after you post a large insurance check, electronically or manually, you can run a report that shows a total of that check, all right? And you want to make sure that the person that posted that check, the check amount matches what PCC thinks the check amount is, just to make sure you're capturing everything within that check has been posted in PCC. If it's not accurate, or if it doesn't match on the totals report, you run this detail report. It'll prompt you for the check number, so you run it for one check at a time, and it gives you the full detail that you can check to see, okay, did I miss a particular payment, or did I post a payment incorrectly? These are really, really important to run. And I mentioned here, coming soon, we have an EHR report version of this, and we're actually in the process of building this right now. So soon, you'll be able to run this in the EHR in a much easier way, and it'll be easier to run rather than in practice management. Are there folks, just a show of hands, I want to see, do people use this report in practice management for billers on a regular basis? Okay. Yeah, it's important. You want to make sure that your insurance checks are fully posted. Okay. If you're doing a lot of manual posting of insurance checks, it's even more reason to run this report, just to make sure you're not missing something. All right, let's talk a little bit about the dashboard. All right. I presented on the dashboard on Tuesday in the pre-conference. And I asked folks in the room at that session who had regularly used the dashboard. I don't have a Slido poll for this, but just a show of hands, who regularly uses the dashboard on a monthly basis, or maybe even more often than once a month? All right. Not everybody, all right? Some people, most people, that's good. The dashboard is really meant to be a tool for you to use on a regular basis. The data is refreshed every month, but it's meant to show your performance financially and clinically compared to your peers in a variety of different measures. The dashboard is accessible from the EHR under the reports menu. Okay, like I said, it's loaded once a month. All right, we collect data automatically on your system on the first Saturday of every month. Okay, that data gets loaded into a database. It takes a few days for that to show up on your dashboard. Pediatric specific benchmarks. So again, for every measure, you're going to see a benchmark which represents all of PCC's client data, so you can compare your practice to pediatric benchmarks. Clinical measures are accurate right away. So if you're a new PCC practice and you've converted data, you've brought over immunization records from patients, you've brought over visit information, the clinical measures are accurate. Financial measures, not so much. That takes a little while to become accurate. So if you're new with PCC, it's usually I tell people about 6 to 8 months after go live is when you should expect to see things like revenue per visit, which we'll talk about, some other AR measures and pricing measures to be accurate. So just an expectation on the financial side, usually takes a little time after you initially go live to have some good data for that. All right, benchmarks. Like I said, there are pediatric specific benchmarks in there which represent all of PCC clients' data. For every measure, you're going to see an average. You're going to see a top performers, which is the top 10% of PCC clients. You'll also, for some measures on the clinical side, see HEDIS benchmarks, which are other benchmarks reported by insurance companies. So they're national benchmarks, not necessarily just pediatric and pediatric practices, but national benchmarks as reported by HEDIS, which is a NCQA organization that collects data from mostly insurance companies. Okay. Scoring, a little bit about scoring. So in the dashboard, the clinical and financial measures are scored subjectively by PCC. So what we do is we say, okay, what should get a score of 100 for any given measure? And we have that defined amount, and then we also say what should get a score of 0 for a particular measure. And then we set those values, and your distance from the low and the high, there's a formula there that calculates your actual score. So again, we set the scores. When you're in the dashboard, when you first log in, you're going to see your top priorities. Your lowest scores show at the top here, show first. All right. Talking about we were talking before about billing reports. So I want to mention some billing measures that you're going to see in the dashboard. AR days. It's a standard accounts receivable days. Standard measure in the billing industry, and it really approximates the length of time, how many days it takes you to collect on money that is owed. Okay, you'll see this measure in the dashboard. Okay, there are other AR measures. If you want to get a little bit more detail, in addition to AR days, you're going to see in the dashboard for any AR measure in the dashboard a related tool section. With a link to a detailed AR summary report. Okay, in that you're going to see data and measures like this. Okay, you'll be able to see an AR percentage by aging category. So, like, what percentage of your total practice's AR is current, or 30 to 60 days, 60 to 90 days, and so forth. And you can compare to the average. So again, this is available within the detailed benchmark or detailed breakdown for any AR measure in the dashboard. The other one is AR 60 to 90 days. So we focus on that and we give you a graph and trend for that particular measure because it's a good one to look at, because if you have a high percentage there, you have some claims that are approaching a timely filing limit, which is usually about 90 days for insurance companies. If you do not send a claim to an insurance company, if they do not receive it within 90 days, you often won't be able to get paid for it. They could deny it as past timely filing limit. So that's why we say, okay, if you have a high percentage here, there's a problem. All right, you have a lot of claims that may have been rejected, may have had some issues that you really should drill in and figure out what's going on with those. Okay, but again, these are high-level oversight reports that are good to look at and keep an eye on a regular basis, and they're right in your dashboard. All right, so back on the practice management side, all right, there's a standard report for if you wanted to see your AR for each insurance group, and it's an AR summary report for each insurance group. Under insurance billing and collections in practice management, insurance agent report, and it looks like this, okay? You run this, you have each insurance, you have total dollars in each aging bucket, each aging category. All right, how much is Blue Cross, how much is outstanding for claims for Blue Cross versus other insurances? So it's good to look at this, and again, this is high level, but it's good to get an idea of how much is outstanding from each insurance. And if you have one particular insurance that has a really, really high amount in the like 60 to 90 or 90 to 120, that indicates there's maybe an issue with claims for that particular insurance. Okay, you get percentages here, which is percentage of total, and then also a percent for each aging category too. Okay, so again, this is a high-level place to look and see if you have any particular insurance company that may have some issues. All right, it also gives you an idea of what percentage of your accounts receivable is outstanding for each insurance. At the very bottom, you're going to get your totals, and then also personal credits. So if how much you have outstanding for personal credits in the practice, and that's just a grand total. Okay. All right. Are there any questions about billing oversight reports? And again, I'm really high level here. I haven't got into your actual billing process. Your billers are I mean, they're drilling in to AR within each insurance, and they have reports that they're using for that. But this is really meant to be as a billing manager or office manager or clinician wanting to get an idea for the health of the practice on the billing side. These are really the best reports for that. Yeah, do you want to come up to the mic real quick? We have people that are streaming virtually, and I just want to make sure they can hear the question.
I have one question on that insurance aging summary. Is it based on the date of service, or is it based on the date that the claim was sent out?
Good question. I meant to hit on that. So you have the choice of how to run it. So when you run this report, it'll say, do you want to age it by transaction date, which is the date of service, or you can age it based on posting date, which is the day the claim was posted into PCC. It's pretty close to transaction date. Or you can age it by payer date, which is the date that that insurance became responsible for the balance. So you could have a claim sent out to one insurance, and then 30, 60 days later, it pens maybe a secondary insurance, or there was an issue with it, you sent it back out. By aging it by payer date is based on when they became last responsible for the balance. I say it's generally most useful to run that way, just because it gives you a representation of AR as of when they became responsible for it. But running it by transaction date is also useful, because if you want to go back and say, what are my balances as of the actual visit date? You're going to see things shift if you run it different ways. But you do have the option when you run it to choose any of those three aging methods. Okay. Productivity reporting. I want to talk about this, and you all do this. You all need to know charges, payments, RBUs, visits, by provider sometimes, or for the practice. So these are really, really important reports to have an understanding of and run on a regular basis. We're going to talk about those. We're going to talk about E&M coding. We're going to talk about how to identify new patient counts and active patient counts. But the first thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of getting a little bit more detail of what we just talked about, what's the difference between a transaction date and a posting date as it relates to charges and payments? Okay. Transaction date, that is generally visit date. When you're thinking of charges or visits, transaction date is the service or visit date. Okay. When you're thinking of payments, all right, in payment reporting, and you're running reports for payments, and you're asked for transaction versus posted date. For payments, the transaction date is the date attributed to the payment. Okay. If you're manually posting payments, you have the choice of putting in a date. That's the date you're attributing to that payment. That is the transaction date. For auto-posted payments, payments that you're getting electronically, that you're auto-posting into PCC, there's a date attributed to that check, all right, that payment electronically, all right? Typically, it's the date it was deposited in your bank, all right? That is the transaction date for a payment as well, when it's auto-posted, okay? For other payments, more specifically like personal payments that you're putting in, you have a date that you can attribute to that payment. That's the transaction date for the payment. Posting date is a system-generated date of physical posting into the system. So when you're physically putting that payment or charge in. All right, so you have charges that may be posted a couple days after they actually happened. All right, there's two dates there. You got the visit date for those charges, or service date for those charges, and the posting date, which is when you actually put those into the system. Okay, a PCC user cannot change a posting date. Okay, that's the date the system generates for when you're putting in the charge or the payment. Okay, those are the differences there, and it's important to know that, because when you're running reports, you're prompted, do you want to run this for a posting range or a transaction range? And when you're looking at reports, and I think I'll mention in a second, when you're looking at payments, it's always good to look at it by transaction date, and I'll explain why. All right, I want to go through this example. All right, end of month reporting. Okay, it's the end of the month, and you're trying to reconcile payments deposited into your bank account. Hopefully you're all doing this. You have payments in your bank account. You want to make sure all of those payments were posted in PCC. You're trying to reconcile those deposited payments for a given month with a report in PCC of payments that you've entered into PCC. All right, so should you report those payments in PCC by posting date when you physically put them in, transaction date only, or maybe a combination of both? All right, how many think you should report on payments in PCC by posting date, A? All right, no hands. How about B, running it by transaction date, or the date of the check, or the date of the payment? How about C? All right, I only see hands for C. Okay, so some people maybe aren't sure. Some people think C. It could be B or C. All right, when you're looking at payments for this situation, all right, you're reconciling the payments in your bank with a report in PCC. You never want to do it by posting date. All right, because you're putting in payments often after they got deposited in the bank, right? So like you have payments in June that you're physically posting in June. All right, well, those may have been deposited back in May, and you're often putting those in a couple days later. So you don't want to use posting date. Transaction date is most useful when you're running a report in PCC if it's a payment-based report. Okay, so if you're running a report that is based only on our payments in the database, when you're prompted for transaction or posting date, use transaction date. That is the date of the check. That is the date of deposit in the bank. And that's really how you should be able to run it to reconcile. If you're running a day sheet-based report, which I have an example of, you're always prompted for posting date. So you have to give a posting date. All right. You also want to restrict that to a transaction date. You always want to say, I only want payments transacted in the month of May or in the particular month. But it could be posted whenever. All right. It could have been posted in June. Could have been posted after. All right. So we have a report that many of you may run for reconciling payments like this, called Daysheet Totals by Posting Month. All right. In practice management, it's in the Proving Out Reports category. And it looks like this. All right, you run it. It is based on our day sheet. And I talked a lot about more detail about the day sheet in Tuesday's pre-conference. But the day sheet is a transaction log in PCC. All right, it's not a database. It's a transaction log that shows charges, payments, adjustments, and refunds. If you're using a report like this, a Daysheet Totals by Posting Month, when you run that report, okay, the output of the column, this first column is posting month. All right, and you'll see if I'm running this for the month of May, all right, and I want to reconcile my bank deposits in May to what I've actually put in PCC for the month of May. You're going to see, okay, there's often payments that you're posting in June, like the example I just gave before, those insurance checks that you're posting a couple days later. So you will see on a report like this, payments in May, payments attributed in June as well, because this is posting month. All right, so when you run, the example I'm doing here is the month of May. The posting date range you're going to want to use is May 1st through today's date. Now, it says 6/21 because this is when I did that screenshot. But you want to go through today's date, whatever day you're running the report. Okay? That's going to capture all the payments that you posted since the beginning of May, regardless of when you actually ended. You could have entered it the following month. You could have entered it a couple months later. All right, so posting date should be the month of May 1st through today. You want to add a transaction date criteria, and this is the key here. when you're running this reconcile report, and this is what most people forget about, is to add that transaction date restriction. And I'm going to walk through, this is an important one. I want to walk through how to run that report. Adding transaction date restriction is important. You only want to see payments dated or attributed to May, so I'm using May 1st through May 31st for a transaction date restriction. All right, does this make sense? So I'm getting payments posted starting May 1st all the way through now, but attributed to the month of May, transacted in the month of May. Okay. All right, before I talk about this, let me show this. I'm connected on here, so I'm going to just walk through this as an example of running the report. So if you could follow along, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Practice management. So this was a practice management report I'm running. And I just want to make sure you're familiar with how to run practice management reports. When you're in here and you go to, we want to go to SRS, our practice management reports. You'll find this under partner reports, practice management, financial reports, SRS. Or some of you may know the shortcut. If you hit !SRS, that's the name of the reports tool, it'll go right in there. That's just a shortcut. So the report I was running is in payment and proving out reports. And this is my end of month day sheet totals by posting month wide style. All right, so you can use this report for proving out your payments attributed to a given month. So again, my month of May example, all right, the posting date, and it tells us, include items based on posting date. You don't have the option of changing that here. So I'm going to start May 1st, and I'm going to go all the way through today's date, okay? It's unlikely, but I may have had some payments posted in July that were deposited in the bank in May, including or excluding relinked payments, okay? For a reconciling report like this, end of month report, you're going to want to include relinked payments, okay? And this is a complicated scenario, but like when you're running reports like this, I know we're not looking at charges, but if you do not include relinked payments, your charges will be 0. And that's sort of a weird quirkiness with this particular report. Okay. Before I run this report, I need to add that transaction date restriction. Remember that restriction I said we need to say we're only limiting this to payments attributed or to the month of May. That's the transaction date. So to do that, I hit F8, add edit criteria. Okay, and then it's going to say what criteria do you want? All right, there's different ways of pulling up a list of choices. You could do star and then enter, and you're going to see dozens of different options. Or you can use star, date star, and it'll show you every restriction criteria with the word date in it. Okay. Transaction date is the one you want here. So I want to add a restriction criteria of transaction date and proceed and say May 1st through May 31st. Okay, so you can see I'm running my report. Posting date could be any time. Transaction date is May, the month of May. Accept criteria. Okay, so I get my output. This is a test database. There's not much data in here. But when you run this report on your system, this is really what's going to give you what was posted, what you've entered in PCC for a given month, attributed to a month. Your payments, cash, check, credit cards, minus refunds. Again, like if you're refunding, you're going to see that as a negative number. That should match your bank deposit for the month. We're including all types of payments with this, so insurance payments are going to show under check. Personal payments would be either cash or credit card. All right. So So this is one way, one report to run to reconcile that end of month. And I wanted to take time to go through this example because this is a common report you'd run. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different reports that we have that show payment amounts, okay? I want to make sure you're running it the right way. All right, so I have really, really good news. You won't have to run that report much longer. We are working on, and Tori's in the back of the room. Tori, raise your hand. She's our business analyst for our reports development team, and she's been talking with our developers, along with myself, about planning and designing this report, along with Dan Gillette, who's designing it. We are adding a new report in the report library that you can use for exactly this. Okay, it's going to be called Total Charges and Payments by Provider and Month. This is expected in the next release in 10.1 this fall, and it will allow you to get in a better, more friendly UI, total charges, payments, and adjustments by provider for a given month. So you can specify a transaction date. You can restrict providers. You can restrict procedures. Okay? So if you're running productivity reports for your providers each month, but you know you need to exclude payments for vaccines or charges for vaccines, this report will allow you to do that really easily. Okay? You can limit it to locations too. So that's coming. This is an example of what that output looks like. For productivity reporting, many times you need to run, if you need to see charges and payments, you got to run separate reports. This was one report that shows charges, payments, adjustments, refunds, all on one report. And the other great thing is it allows you, as you run it, to customize the output. So you get your output and you say, okay, I want to see a subtotal by provider. You can just click on Group By and change that to provider, and you get that. You can change that to, you can add procedure group in here, and you'll see a subtotal by provider and procedure group. So it's going to be a lot easier to use versus what I just walked through for SRS reports. So coming soon in the next release, we're going to have lots of documentation and training on how to use that. All right, provider visits. All right. We're also we're more in the beginning of stages of adding visit reports to the EHR report library. That's not coming in the next release. That's probably going to be a little later on. But for now, you can get provider visit reports from SRS. If you want total visits for each provider, total visits, charges, payments by provider is a good report for that. I do want to emphasize this here. Payments and charges that you see on this report, on a visit-based report, are payments and charges attributed to those visits. So you run this report for a given month or time frame. This is not payments that transacted or came in during that time frame. It's very different. This is payments or charges on the visits that happened in that time frame. Okay? So that's why when you run a visit report like this and you look at your total payments, it's not going to match that report we just looked at for payments. These are payments for the visits that happened in that time period. Okay, I'll run an example of that in a second. When you're running visit reports, this is important. You may have charges such as no-show fees, form fees, other fees that really aren't visits. Okay, you sometimes post those. When you run our visit reports, the way we calculate visits is counting charges, actually. We count charges and we limit it to show, like if you have a group you have a well visit with a well visit code and a group of immunizations, we count that as one visit. If you have a no-show fee without a CPT code, but just a fee, the report will count that as one visit. All right, it sees a charge for a given day for a given patient. It's going to count that as one visit. You can exclude that if you specify include only revenue when you run these visit reports. That does not happen by default. Okay, So that's why it's important that you do this, especially if you do have a lot of those non-service fees that you post. And I'll walk through that in a second. Provider visit breakdown. So we have a report. If you ever want to see, the prior example was total visits for each provider, but what if you wanted to see sick or well visits, or immunization only visits, or telemedicine visits? You wanted to break that out. You can get that with a standard report we have called per visit analysis by provider, grouped by visit type. Okay. Standard report. You can also see things like deposited per visit, like how much am I collecting on average per visit for a sick visit or a well visit? Is it different for one provider versus another provider? Like if I'm looking at a sick visit category here, if one provider, these are bogus numbers, but if one provider had higher deposits per visit than another provider, like why would that be for sick visits? It could be that they're coding higher level sick visits more often. So you can get some interesting data from a visit breakdown report like this, not just total volume, but deposits and revenue for those visits. All right, a little bit about visit categories. So I showed in the screenshot, we have sick visits, well visits, and others. We have a background, like we have a file in the background that defines your visit categories. And they are, by default, sick, well, consult, hospital, counseling, vaccine only, telephone, portal, telemed, and miscellaneous. So anything that doesn't match one of those other categories or doesn't have a CPT code that fits into one of those other categories goes into miscellaneous. All right. We categorize based on the CPT codes used within the visit. Well and the sick code on the same day, that we categorize as a well visit. Okay. We don't count that as 2 visits. We count that as 1 well visit if you have 2 visit codes on the same day. If you have a modified CPT code, 99213-25 or -95 for telemedicine or something like that, that will categorize it appropriately, okay? Whether it has a modifier or not. Okay. All right, so I'm going to jump back to practice management. I'm going to walk through a couple of these reports just to show you how to run them, how to add that revenue-only restriction, and so forth. So let's jump over here. And the one I mentioned for visits by provider, it's under productivity, provider productivity reports. And you'll see it, total visits, charges, and payments by provider. All right, you can run this, specify your reporting period. I'm going to go year to date, just to get a bigger sample of visits here. So year to date through the end of June. All right, it includes items based on transaction date. So again, transaction date for visits is actual service or visit date. All right, by default, if I run this as it is, it's going to go out and try to calculate visits based on CPT codes billed. I need to add criteria to include only revenue charges. I don't want those form fees or non-service revenue stuff. So F8, and I'll just do a plain star, and just because I don't know exactly what it's called here, I think it's I think it's revenue, include only revenue charges. All right, so include only revenue charges. You could also find it by doing star rev star. All right, I don't need to enter it twice, but I just wanted to show that. So this is an important restriction to add. And again, I do that by hitting F8 before I run my report. All right, there's a lot of other restrictions you can do, but F8 before you run the report is how you can restrict it to include only revenue. So let's run it. All right, I'm just going to view it on the screen for now, and I get my totals. So total visits, deposits per visits, charges per visit. Again, that's charges and deposits on those visits. Okay. All right, so that's easy report, but I wanted to emphasize that important restriction to add. I will add, actually, I ran this report, and I know I only want include only revenue next time. I don't want to have to add that restriction. You can save this as default. So if I hit F4, save as default, it saves that criteria, so the next time I run that report, it'll default to include only revenue. That is a per user setting. Other users will have to do that themselves. You also have the ability to save the report criteria so that if you want to be able to restore a saved criteria that had different options, you can do that. So includes only real/revenue visits. So I can save that. So by doing F5, save report criteria, that's just another way to save it so that you can restore a specific saved criteria. So like when you're at this page, before you enter a date range, you can hit F8 to restore criteria, and it says, okay, here are all the saved versions you have of this report. Which one do you want to restore? There's only that one there, so I restore it, and that will restore a saved criteria. So that's really only useful if you have some very specific criteria that you have in SRS for that particular report. All right. Let's look at, there was another example here, per visit analysis. Okay. Per visit analysis group by payment type. So let's take a look under visit reports, or group by visit type. This one here. If I'm running a per visit analysis by payer, all right, and I want to run it year to date, okay, I want to point out another restriction you may want to do for visit-based reports like this. If I'm really looking at revenue per visit, all right, I'm interested to see how much am I getting paid per visit. So I want to see the total visits, but also how much I'm paid on those visits. You want to add a...
You got to this screen by doing what?
I got to, so the question was, how did I get to this screen? So I picked this report from the Visit Reports menu, F1. So I select the report, I specify my time period, and then I hit F1.
F1 to generate report, but that allows you to
get to the criteria. Yes, yeah, so, and I went through 6:30, I hit F1, and then it gets me to the page. This is the only spot where I can add criteria. And what I'm going to do, I'm looking at a revenue report. One criteria I want to point out is include only paid charges. So I'm going to have, remember I went through June 30th. I may have some visits in June that haven't been paid yet. If I'm interested in seeing revenue per visit, how much am I getting paid per visit? I only want visits that had been paid. Okay, otherwise I'm going to see a deflated revenue per visit number. So there's amount due for visit, which is a good criteria to know about, because this will let me say, all right, how much do I want to restrict on for amount due? 0 to 0. And that's going to say, show me only visits that have zero amounts due. Yes, question here.
So when we put the revenue per visit on the dashboard, are those unpaid yet?
Good question.
Excluded?
So the question was, and I'm going to get into some dashboard revenue per visit. The question was, revenue per visit in the dashboard, does that exclude unpaid visits? And technically, it does not, but we go back, the time frame we use for that will exclude recent visits. So we actually leave out the last 3 months of visits with that calculation. We go back a year, but then we end that reporting period 3 months ago. So it's leaving out recent visits as another way to try to exclude visits that hadn't had a chance to be paid.
What about the E&M coding distribution on the dashboard? So, because if we have clinicians who are working on coding better,
Yeah.
and getting paid for what you do, so I want to give them feedback, like, how are they coding?
Yeah. So the question was, how about E&M coding distribution, and how does that get calculated? I'm going to come to that. I'm going to save that answer for a minute because we're going to talk about E&M coding in a minute, and we'll talk about how it reports in the dashboard. But when I run this report, I'll show you what it looks like and really what to look at here. I am restricting this to include only visits that have zero amount due on them, that had a chance to be paid. So when I look at this average deposited per visit, I can compare that apples to apples. I can look at, let's look at the sick visits. I can look at, I ran this by visit type. So I'm looking at each different visit level. It's not by provider. I can compare a 992 and 3 visit to a 992 and 4 visit on average, so I can tell what my average payment is for the time period I ran it for different visit types. I think the previous example I had was running this by provider, so I just ran this by group by visit type, but the one right above it will break it out by provider as well. So these are just a couple visit-based reports. I'm going to move on here and get into other productivity reports. Just a quick mention of the missed appointment rate benchmark. So this is showing in the dashboard for the last, I think it's based on the last year's worth of appointments. It might be the last 3 months. It should say it in the dashboard. Appointments in the last 3 months. I have it right on the slide. How many of those were missed? All right, if your practice is marking appointments as missed, no-show in the schedule, it will track that here, so you can compare to the average. E&M visit coding, so let's get to that. So in the dashboard, we have a measure for E&M coding comparison that will look at the percentage of level 4s and 5s of all of your sick visits. So this practice is at 43%. That's 43% of their sick visits were coded as level 4 or 5. In the dashboard, we have under related tools. Let me walk over through that. So I have a demo dashboard here. So let's walk through here, and I can make this bigger. That should be easier to read. E&M coding. Let's find that right here. All right, the measure as I just described it is percentage of level 4 and level 5 visits. And I'm getting an error. Figures. Okay, bear with me 1 second. All right, E&M coding. Yep, percentage of level 4 and 5 visits. I wanted to point out in the related tools, we have the provider E&M coding comparison. So this is looking at, for any given time period, so I can go January through the end of June if I wanted to, and view the coding curve, coding comparison for each, for the total practice, all providers aggregated in this example. I think your question before was, is this, or what was your question before? Was it looking at, what time period was it looking at?
Yeah, so like if they're changing their practices, how do we know
Yeah.
what we see that?
Yeah, the measure itself is looking at the last 3 months worth of visits. Let me go back here and just to the measure details because it should say it in the description of the measure. The question is what time period is it looking at for the visits here? It doesn't say it in the, yeah, I can follow up with you on that. I'm pretty sure it's looking at the last 3 months of visits. It may be the last full year. But you can also see a trend for the practice. And this is like a snapshot of each dashboard data collection each month. But you can, in the coding comparison, actually specify the time period if you wanted to look at individual providers. Like what visit date range do you want to look at? By default, I think it goes the last few months. So this is March through May. So if they're working to improve their coding, you can look at specific time periods to see and you can restrict this by provider to see if they are changing. But you'd have to run it a few different times and get some different comparisons. Okay. Okay, so active patient counts. In the dashboard under patient population, we have a graph that looks just like this for your practice. You can filter on different age ranges, but this is designed to show how many active patients do I have at my practice. So again, this is another good, I call it a productivity measure. It's really like how many patients is my practice growing? How many patients do I have? If you see an upward trend like this, that indicates you're adding more patients to the practice. So, and you can filter on under 15-month-old patients. So if you wanted to see, how is my newborn patterns? What are my newborn patterns? Am I adding more newborns? If I filtered on under 15 months, and I can see what that trend is. Lee, can you confirm? I think we go till 12, actually. No, yeah, okay. Yeah, so monitor your active patient trends for the practice or individual PCP. So you can also filter by individual provider. That's primary care provider assigned to patients. So you can filter on that. How many patients does X provider have, and what is their trend over time? How many new patients do I have? So we don't show this in the dashboard. We don't show these lists. But in the practice management reports, we have one called New Patients by Visit Type, and it'll actually give you a list of all new patients all patients that had a new patient visit code billed. So it's designed to specifically filter on new patient well and new patient sick, new patient hospital, all of the new patient visit codes, and show you a list of those patients. So this can be good just to get a count or a list of patients that are new to your practice. Now, technically, these aren't newborns. These aren't always newborns. I don't know if it does give a date of birth, but you could have a new patient, older patient that just joined your practice that has a new patient code. So keep that in mind. This is just showing new patients coming to the practice, not necessarily newborns. Unless you happen to restrict this to like the 99381 code, which I think would be the first well visit. All right, let's move on and talk about some strategic oversight reporting. We're going to get into really more revenue per visit discussion and some other dashboard stuff. All right, so Financial Pulse in the dashboard is designed to be one overall score for various financial measures that we report in the dashboard. So we show you which measures are included in that, all right, and the weighting, all right. So these are most of the financial measures we have in the dashboard. So based on a specific weighting that we assign, so 40% of your overall Pulse score is based on your revenue per visit. That really has the most impact financially of these measures, and that's why we give it the highest weighting. And then AR, E&M coding, distribution have a lower weighting, pricing, and RVUs. So overall, you'll see that Pulse score, and that's really how it's calculated. So as a practice, we're going to talk about revenue analysis, and I'm going to show you some key reports to identify how much am I getting paid for specific procedures from specific insurance companies. How can I improve my practice? How can I improve my revenue? So these are all, it's really important to do this to find out how you can improve and what the trends are for your practice. The dashboard shows some nice trends, but you can also really dig in a little bit more than what the dashboard shows. Am I suddenly getting paid more or less than I used to? Another reason, these are questions that you're able to answer by running certain reports in practice management. You also, has anyone negotiated with insurance companies recently, or have you gone through that process in the past? There's some homework involved. You got to understand your data. You got to know what you're currently getting paid before you go and ask for more, right? You got to know what Medicaid or what Blue Cross versus United pays, and what the variance is among different insurances. So you can get reports for that. It's really important to look at that as you prepare for negotiations. Just as an aside, I think we have a whole track of insurance negotiation sessions at the conference. I don't know if it's this afternoon or tomorrow. I think it's today. If you're trying to prepare for that, they're going to talk about the important data that you need to look at to prepare for that, which is going to be some of this stuff. Doing that revenue analysis is really important, and getting an understanding of how to get that data is important. So revenue per visit in the dashboard, average dollars collected per patient visit. All right, this is based on, it's a calculation based on all revenue in all visits. Okay, we give you that number, we give you a benchmark for that as well. We give you a comparison with and without immunization. So I'm going to get into the dashboard and I'll show you how to see that, and I'll explain more about those different calculations. So I'll get to that in a second, but I want to point out revenue per visit by payer. If you wanted to see how much does Blue Cross pay me per visit, what's my revenue per visit from Blue Cross versus United? Versus Cigna versus Medicaid. You can run a report called Per Visit Analysis by Payer to get that. All right, important restriction reminder here, and I did this before. Restrict on amount due per visit and say 0 to 0, especially if you're going through the current visits or recent visits. Include only revenue visits. I mentioned this before. We want to include only real visits when we count this report, not no-shows or other things. We don't want that to inflate our total visits. Okay. When you run that report, you're going to get a report like this, all right? And I'll show you where that report lives in a second. So what you want to focus on is this column here, average deposited per visit. And how does it vary for different insurances? Which are my best and worst payers? Okay. Some of them are going to be much higher than others when you run this on your system. So it's important to have that high-level understanding of how much you're getting paid on average per visit from each insurance. Okay? You can take this a step further with some other reports that actually will break it out by visit type. How much am I getting paid for well visits for each insurance, for sick visits from each insurance, and so forth. So when you're to run this, just to point out, it lives in the visit reports category. And in SRS, whoops, a little delayed here. Visit reports. It's coming. And you select that. All right, looks like our network's a little slow right now. This second one here is the one I'm going to run, per visit analysis by payer. All right. And okay, so I run this. I can give my date range. Let's go back to the beginning of the year again. I can go through today because I'm going to add this important restriction in a second that will allow me to see. Why don't I see my function keys? There we go. I hit F8. I restrict on amount due per visit, and I see if I do star due star, it'll come up as the selection there. The second, I'm going to add a second criteria. Remember, include only revenue charges. Revenue star, that will pull that up. Those are the two restrictions I want this. I want real visits, only revenue charges, and I want paid visits, only those with 0 due. All right, so 0 to 0. Here we go. I run this report. And I get my output. So it's going to look like the screenshot I had before, but you have each insurance, and you can look at that deposited per visit and see how it varies. This data is really wonky because it's sample data, but I urge you, if you're not familiar with this report, run it. Get an understanding of what, as a total, as an aggregate, what your average revenue per visit is for each payer. Just to back up a step and show you the next level, like what's my revenue per visit by payer by visit type. Another great one to look at. So right below it. So group by visit type. And I'll show you a sample of that. So, oops. Again, I add my restrictions of amount due, revenue, 0 to 0. And I'm going to save this default. If I want to run it the same way and just change the date range later, if I hit that F4, save as default, I won't have to do what I just did and add that criteria. All right, so I want to show you what the sample of what this output looks like. All right, so for each visit type and each code within each visit type, so we got 2 levels of visit categories here, and each insurance, I can tell what, on average, I'm getting paid, average deposited per visit for each of those different visit types from each insurance. So this can really take it a step further and look at what is my average revenue per visit for different visit types from each insurance. Some insurances may pay really, really well for sick visits, but really poorly for well visits, or vice versa. It's good to know that, especially when you're thinking about negotiating with insurance. Okay, I'm going to get even deeper here with some other report samples. So take a look back here. Pricing. All right. Review all your prices at least once a year. So this is going to be listed as one of those yearly recommended reports. We have RVU-based reports in PCC. We have a pricing analysis one that can show you for every CPT code what your average charge is and what the price is at a specific percentage of the Medicare value for a given year. Okay. I think I have an example of this that I'll talk about. Why look at it like I just described? Why look at it based on RVU values, based on that Medicare rate? Most insurance companies in their fee schedules, in their contracts, will set their fee schedule based on a percentage of Medicare. Okay, so you want to look at it. What would my price be at a specific percentage of Medicare? So you can compare that apples to apples. Most insurance companies use those Medicare values to define what their fee schedule is. I want to point out this IMAdmin. So there have been significant RVU value increases in recent years, particularly with IMAdmins and some other codes too. So it's important to run this once a year, a couple times a year, just to make sure your prices are in line with what they should be and what the RVU values are, which change every year. Just to show you the trends, this is benchmarks based on all PCC client data over the last 10 years. Practices are charging more and more, all right? And it's really just in line with what the Medicare values, how those are changing from year to year. And, I mean, Chip and I and others, we've reminded you guys more all the time about this. Get your prices in line with what you're actually getting paid and what the Medicare values are. So it's good to see that upward trend as a benchmark. There's a drop here in 2021. I think it was because sick visit values decreased that year. They got back in line, and that's why it's brought closer or brought it back to what it was prior to that. So these are the benchmarks, and so I show this because when you run the pricing reports at your practice, you may want to know, all right, what should I aim for my prices? Looking at benchmarks are good. Looking at what your actual payments are also good, and I have a good report for that I'll talk about here. Yeah, as I mentioned, refer to the dashboard. The dashboard has a for your practice based on all of your charges, what your percentage of Medicare is for the current year, what your percentage of Medicare is for your prices, based on your prices, and what the benchmarks are. All right, the pricing analysis report. I'm not going to run this, but I think I have a good screenshot of an example. Under RVU reports in practice management SRS, when you run that, you give it a date range, you give it a database year. So I mentioned before, every year the Medicare values change. Use the current year if you want the most current, what you want to see what the most current Medicare values are. If you can use the current year. The multiplier is, this will the benchmark just a second ago of 199% as the average. When you run this report, if you give it a 199 or 200% multiplier, you're going to see a column with the calculation of the fee at that defined value, at that 199 or 200%. So this is going to, you can change this to be potentially what you want, what the value would be at a higher percentage of Medicare. You give it your office zip code. The values are different based on where you are, your location. Medicare's values are adjusted with a geographic factor based on your location. Don't worry about budget neutrality adjustment. Always say no to that. All right, so you're going to get a report output that looks like this. The two columns I want to point out is your average charge amount. All right, this is your price for the time period that you ran the report for. And then over on the right here, you get your RVU Medicare FACF at X percent. That 140 would be whatever the multiplier you used when you ran the report. So you can see what the value is for every given procedure at the given multiplier. All right, so you run that report, you get an idea of what you're charging and maybe what the price would be at a higher amount. Tori, is there a question?
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat. How do we exclude vaccine charges from these reports?
Okay. I think the question's probably, I wonder if it's related to pricing analysis or other reports, but I'll answer that. So I'm not going to go back to the screenshot, but the report we're designing, the new report we're designing for the EHR, where you can see charges, payments, and adjustments by provider. It'll be easy to exclude vaccines because you'll have a procedure group restriction there where you can say, show me charges, payments, adjustments without vaccines. So if the question was about productivity reporting, the report we're designing will make it easy. In SRS reports, okay, we have charge-based reports and payment-based reports where you can add a restriction, like I did for the amount due and including only revenue charges. You can add a restriction for procedure of charge or procedure of linked charge for payments. That's how you can do it with SRS reports. if I have time, maybe I can go through an example of how to do that with SRS reports. But I wanted to emphasize we're making that easy with our productivity reports in the EHR. Yeah.
So I'm really new to this. How do we know what to put for RVU multiplier?
Okay, good question. So the question is how do we know what to put for an RVU multiplier when we run this report? So I'm going to back up here. So you want to know, okay, the first thing is what is your practice at now? So you look in the dashboard, or you can run that SRS report to see what your practice is at now. You may, like, when you run this report, the multiplier you put in here is just, it's if you're interested in raising your prices to be a certain percentage of Medicare, a higher rate, like for example, if you wanted to know, okay, what is 199% of Medicare for each procedure? What is the value of that procedure at the benchmark, at the PCC average? If you put in 199, this column would be the calculation of what the value would be at that percentage. So I guess the answer to that, what percentage should you put in there, and what value you should be charging, you really want to know where you're at now, and also, which gets to the next report I'm going to show, what are you actually getting paid? Are you getting paid at your charge amount or really close to your charge amount? If so, then you're going to want to increase accordingly. So it depends on really where you're looking to get to, I guess. We can talk more about that in some of the drop-in sessions too. All right. Any other questions about pricing reports? The next one is really the one that I think is a little bit more straightforward and more useful to understand, because it gives you a pricing comparison, a pricing analysis, and a payment analysis at the same time. Because really, when you're thinking about your prices, you got to know what you're actually getting paid too, and make a comparison between those two. So this report in SRS under RVU reports is called Reimbursement Analysis with RVU by CPT code. When you run that, it's going to prompt you automatically which procedures you want to include with this. You can select all, or you can select just the ones that you're really interested in seeing. When I run it, I usually select all. When you're running it, especially if you're going up until a transaction date, a recent transaction date, make sure you do that restriction criteria like I mentioned before. Amount due for visit, specify 0. You're going to run this report to show you what you're charging for procedures and what you're getting paid. So you want to leave out the visits or charges that you haven't been paid on. And you're going to get a report that looks like this. Okay, so for every procedure and every insurance, you're going to see how many times you've billed it, what your average charge amount is. This is what your price is. And then for that procedure, what your average deposit it is for each insurance company. Okay, this is a really, really good report to get an idea of what you're actually getting paid for the work you're doing from various insurances. So when you see your price, like for Cigna, of $56 for this office visit, and you see your payment the same, what are you going to do? What should you do? Yeah, it's time to raise your price. All right, insurance companies they're not going to pay you more than what you charge. All right, you always want to say, and Chip and I usually recommend having a 20% buffer there. Your price should be about 20% higher than what your best insurance pays. All right, your prices need to be set the same for every insurance, for every patient. Okay. But you want to set your fee. A good benchmark or a good thing to aim for, or strive for, is to have a price that's 20% higher than what your best insurance would pay. So in this example, 56 happens to be the best payment for this office visit code. My price should be about 20% higher than that 56. So $10, $12 higher than that. Just to have a cushion. Now, why do I say 20%? Fee schedules change, all right? Some fee schedules may increase without you knowing. You want to have that little cushion. You never want to be underpricing your work. You never want to charge what insurance would pay. You would be leaving money on the table in that case, okay? So this, and I mean, this screenshot has an office visit example. I can tell you, for most of you, when you run this report, it's the immunizations that are probably the ones that you're undercharging for. Because you don't, when you're setting a fee, there's no RVU value for immunization. So you can't run that prior report to see what your price for that IM would be at a certain percentage. You got to look at what you're paying, what you're buying the vaccine for, and really what insurances are actually paying for that vaccine. Especially new vaccines that you've recently started giving, make sure those fees are set appropriately. You don't want to leave money on the table for vaccines by undercharging. Okay, so this is a really important report. I encourage everybody, if you haven't run this report, this would be the one. If you're going to leave this session and trying to think of a report to run, this would be the one that I would highlight. You want to know what you're getting paid for each procedure from each insurance, and make sure you're not leaving money on the table. All right. Questions? Are there any other questions? I want to make sure I answered everything. Tori, are there anything else coming through? Follow up on any of that stuff? No? Okay. Yeah. This report? Yeah. So let me walk through it. Let me walk through it here. All right. So really the one I want to walk through is this one. All right, because this gives you a pricing analysis and payment at the same time. So this is the one I really recommend most practices run. That lives in RVU reports. So in SRS, RVU reports, reimbursement analysis with RVUs by CPT code is the one. So you run that, and I'll run it year to date. Database year of this year, I'm going to say, I'm just going to put the benchmark, the PCC benchmark of 200%. My office zip code, and F1. When I run it, it asks me, okay, which procedures do you want to include in the output? I'm going to select all. I just hit F3, select all. I want everything. There's going to be stuff that I don't care about, but I want to just make sure I get everything here. So select all. Add edit criteria to specify my due of 0, right? So star due star is a shortcut to get that amount due. All right, I say 0 to 0. And again, I'm hitting F1, by the way, to process and proceed through all this stuff. All right, amount due is 0. I accept criteria. So this is the report. And I can tell you right now, when I view it on the screen, it's going to be useless. You need to export this and send it as a spreadsheet. And I'll show you how to do that in a second here too. But there's a lot of columns on the report. So that's why, like, if I scroll down, so every procedure I've billed will be in its own section. And along with my average charge and average deposited. So I can see right here, yeah, so like this cryos wart removal or whatever. I've done a few of them. My charge is $59, my payment is $59. I need to raise that price, right? So that's just one example. When you run this, email as a spreadsheet. So any SRS report, you can view it on the screen or you can email it. You just put in your email address and spreadsheet format, and it will send it to you as a Excel spreadsheet. it's a lot easier to work with in a spreadsheet because there's a lot of different columns. Does that answer your question about how to get to it and how to run it? Again, run this report, get a good understanding of that, and make.
Recommend that annually or quarterly, right?
I recommend that maybe not monthly, more quarterly. Yeah, quarterly. I mean, especially if you're doing and adding new procedures, which you don't do that often, but or new immunizations, or if you know that there's a new insurance contract, because the average deposited can change, right? Like, and you can change your date range, by the way. Like I ran it year to date, but if you're you want to limit that to maybe like the last 3 months, you can do that if you know that maybe there were some changes with fee schedules and so forth. But yeah, quarterly is a good idea. And again, it could be spot checking. I mean, you're running that and you're just looking. I really look at those 2 columns, right? Like, what's my charge? What's my payment? All right, so to get back to the question that came in virtually, how do I restrict how do I see charges or payments without vaccines? I talked about this in the pre-conference, but I'll show it here. So, and again, this will be easier with the EHR report we're going to add, but if you're running a provider productivity report, say payments by provider, payment breakdown by provider, and you want to say, I only want to see, or I want to exclude payments for vaccines, okay? Because I have a compensation model where I need to know how much was generated by each provider in payments without vaccines. You can run this report. I'll run it for the month of May. All right, I'm going to look at payments by transaction date. All right, I don't want posting date, but transaction date. Those are payments attributed to the month of May. All right, run this. Now, the restriction you're going to add to limit it to certain procedures, payments for certain procedures, is, I hit F8. If I do star or star PROC star, you'll see payment procedure of linked charge. All right, so if you want to include payments for everything but vaccines, payments attributed to everything but vaccines, I would restrict on that, and it's going to say which groups do you want. You can list by group here, because if I scroll down, I don't want to select these individually. I'm going to select the groups that I want. So if I list by group, I see all of my procedure groups. Those are the different categories of procedures. I select all, and then I go down and say, I don't want immunization. So I deselect. I just hit F2 or enter, and it takes the star off of the immunizations one. I can do this for injections too, if I didn't want injections. You can restrict on anything you want there. So now what I'm going to get when I proceed is payments for all charges except for immunizations and injections. And I run this report. I don't know what I have in here for data. I have a little bit. So each provider, you can see personal insurance payments. If you add those two, you get total payments. But this is payments for services that are not immunizations and not injections. That is how you can do it now to get payments. Charges, you can do a charge-based report in SRS. Something like charge and reimbursement comparison by provider. This would have charge information if you wanted charge amounts. All right, any other questions?
On that report, did we also choose servicing provider versus billing provider?
All right, so the question was, on that report, is it service provider or billing provider? It is service provider as far as I know, but let me run this again. I'm going to run it for all procedures this time. Um, yeah, service provider, and it says that here. We do have the ability to restrict that to billing provider, I believe, if you'd prefer. So like if you have, I don't know, yeah, like I have office showing here. All right, I had some visits under the generic provider of office. I can, those may have been billed under a real provider. If I wanted to see this by billing provider, I believe you have the ability to do that. But that's a good question because sometimes you might want to report on service versus billing provider. Any other questions? Okay, I want to emphasize, I showed this at the beginning, which oversight reports should I run and how often. We have a Learn document. This is brand new. Folks on our billing support team mostly put this together, but there's some good information there if you're wanting to know which reports I should run. I talked about some of those reports, but there's some other ones on there that I didn't get to that are listed there that could be good to look at as well. I want to do a poll. All right, so after this session, I just got to jump into here. I'm curious what areas of your practice you think need the most oversight. So I want to just see what resonates most with the reports that I showed here. What do you think you need to take back and look at specifically at your practice? So whether you're here or at home, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what areas, what reports, what areas you think need the most oversight. When you go into Slido, you might need to specify Maroon Peak, which is where you should find that question. Yeah, billing areas. There's some things I didn't mention. You can get reports of claims, like how many claims am I sending out each month? In the dashboard, we have an EDI dashboard, which is, it's basic information, but it shows how many claims are generated and accepted versus rejected. That can be also good to look at. Yep, absolutely. Pricing. We could spend an hour just talking about pricing and how that all works and how that's all calculated. If the common question is how do I know what to set my prices to? And usually what I tell people is like, look at where you are now, look at the benchmark, and also look at what you're actually getting paid. Yeah. Pricing, reports, claims. Yeah, this is all good stuff. All right. I'm gonna leave this up and running. Any other questions? We have another 15 minutes or so before lunch starts. I'm gonna stick around. Feel free to ask. Yeah, Vladimir? Yeah. So the question there, and it's a good one, you want to oversee your billers and make sure that they're not adjusting stuff that they shouldn't be adjusting. And are there reports that you can use for that? I'm going to bop out of here and jump over here. We have, one thing I can tell you is I don't believe we have the ability to see which billers are posting different adjustments. But we have reports, I think under payment reports, let me jump over here, that will identify how much is being adjusted and what adjustment types are being used. So this report, payment report mini stat style. I want to point this out. I'll run a sample of this. I have no idea what we're going to get when we look at our sample data. But let's run this for the month of May. And what it's going to do is show total payments by type, by payment type used. It's not broken out great, but like, so you should see adjustments. So I have a section of adjustments. So if I wanted to see how much was posted in that time period for bad debt adjustments or other adjustment types. All right, this is a totals only, so you're not going to get much detail with this, but we could design a report that showed you all of the patients that had adjustments done for different reasons. But this could be a good place to start. When adjustments are posted by your billing office, you'd want to know, like, you want to make sure they're being specific on why it's being adjusted. So like you have insurance adjustment, that's the standard, like payment came in and then the contractual adjustment. That's typical insurance adjustment. If they're adjusting due to bad debt or writing off or things like that, they should be using special adjustment types for that. So I guess my answer would be we detail there. You'd want to work individually with our Get Paid team or your client advocate to really drill in on that. And we can talk a little later to try to drill in on that. Does anyone else have that same question about like just keeping an eye on adjustments? The other thing I'll mention is, and this is a good opportunity for us as we think about reports of the future, being able to report on net collection ratio, like of the amount that you should have collected based on your fee schedule. Hopefully you're all putting in fee schedules into PCC. There's a place to do that on the practice management side where you can set your fee schedule. You can define what is expected to be paid for every procedure. What are you actually paid? All right, what are you actually depositing or posting for payments on that? And comparing those two. We don't have a really good report for that right now in the practice management side. But we have opportunities for that as we look at getting more billing reports in the EHR to show information like that. And that I think, Vladimir, will help identify if you're adjusting stuff that you should have collected, that should be part of your fee schedule. We have reports that will compare allowables to payments, but it's tricky because it includes payments that could have come in later. So the reports we have in practice management aren't perfect for that sort of analysis, but it's something that we will be thinking about as we get more billing reports in the EHR. Any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
I'm sorry, what was the name of this report?
This was the, I'll go all the way to the top, payment report mini stat style. It is in the payment reports category of SRS. And again, it's just subtotal, total amounts by different payment types. We can rather easily design a report that will give you detail for each of these as well. And that's the other thing I want to emphasize is, I've showed some stock standard reports we have, but we constantly are customizing reports. SRS has that ability to configure and customize reports. Talk to us. Let us know if you have a report you're not able to find, we can work with you to try to get that. Lee is in the back. He's a client advocate. Lee, do you do custom reports for clients often?
Weekly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a conversation, like reporting and data needs is something you want to talk with your client advocate about. We can customize a lot of this stuff. Yeah.
What about the first report you showed of like what the actual codes that they're using for the visits? It was called Daily Sheet or Daily.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
How did you get there?
All right. So I didn't show, so you can, from the EHR, I don't know if I have a good example here. One thing I mentioned is you can click on in posted, and it'll show you what was charged. So you can go in and out of different ones, just a spot check. On the practice management side, I can show you the report that I referred to. Back down here. It is not in SRS, it's actually in proving out reports. So if I go back out here, actually it might be in billing reports. Nope. It's called daily check. Yeah, all right, billing functions, proving out, daily check. The other thing you can do is just exclamation point, daily check. That'll run it. So when you run it in here, I don't know if I'm going to get any data on this sample database, but you specify a particular date. You can only run it for one day at a time. So you can say, show me things posted yesterday. You can limit it to certain places of services or providers. But yeah, the report output, you jump to a nice slide here, just to show you what a typical output will be. At the beginning. Yeah, it'll look like this, where you're going to see what was billed, what was charged. I do not think the CPT codes are included on here. Maybe there's different level of detail. Actually, I think there's different level of detail that you can run that has CPT codes. But you can see what was charged, if there was a missing admin or modifier, you'll be able to pick up on that. And it's more of a spot check report. You can compare what was posted and checked out versus what was charted and documented in the EHR. But when you run that report over here, you'll see there's different levels of detail. Yeah, so play around with that, look at different levels of detail. You may see different CPT codes in there too.
Oh, you do brief, okay, because the full one does actually show you the CPT, or?
Yeah, I think the full would, yeah. And then, yeah, there's an interactive screen. If you're familiar with functionality in the practice management, you can run this report. I'm not going to see anything in here, but you can interactively go in and out of different programs. So like, if you wanted to go, I don't know if you're familiar with OOPS, correct mistakes, you can jump to correct mistakes from the output of this report with the interactive mode.
Tim, we have another, sorry.
Yep.
We have another question in the chat. If we wanted to change our fee schedule to a higher Medicare percentage, does it have to be done one by one for each CPT, or is there a way to update all the CPTs to a higher percentage all at once?
It needs to be done one by one for each CPT. Yeah, so it is in your table. May already know this, but in TED, or table editor, on the practice management side, every procedure can be found in here. And yes, if you realize you need to change your fee, you need to do it one by one, individually for each procedure. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a good way to assign that for all procedures at once. Not right now. That is a great wish to add in the wishing well for whoever wished for that wish virtually. And actually, I don't think virtual attendees can put wishing well wishes in, but you can do the virtual voting exercise, I think, right? So, but that is a great wish and something we can think about as we think about redesigning that, some of the billing functionality. Any other questions related to reports? And again, I'm going to be in the session this afternoon along with a bunch of other PCC folks. There's a walk-in reports session this afternoon. There's another one tomorrow afternoon. We're happy to help clarify any of these reports. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope this was helpful.